Okay, let's talk about dogs who are barking way too much and you don't know what to do about it. Excessive barking is probably one of the most reasons people come to me as a dog trainer. So if you are struggling with your dog barking way too much, you're not alone. The good news is that there are good training solutions that can reduce the barking a lot or even get rid of it. The bad news is that most of the solutions take time and quick fix does not exist. So if you see somewhere on the internet somebody promising you quick fix in one session to get rid of your dog barking, run away, because most of the time this is going to be a gimmick that doesn't work, or it's going to be a bad advice that's going to backfire in future. And I will give examples of such advice later in the video. The good dog training solution will require not only time, but also a very good understanding why your dog is barking in the first place. Barking is not something random that dogs do. It always has a reason. You can even look at the barking as the way of dogs trying to communicate something to us. Sometimes it's intentional communication. Sometimes it's more like a emotional response, but there is always a reason and there is always an explanation why the barking happens. And if you're using a solution that is not addressing the underlying issue, you're probably not going to get rid of barking. So maybe if you tried something and it didn't work, maybe that's the reason why it didn't work, because you didn't address the right thing. Before we go into deeper understanding why dogs bark and how to get rid of it, let's talk about a few important things that we need to understand and accept as pet parents. The first one, we need to understand and accept that barking is a natural way for dogs to express their feelings, to communicate something to us. And some breeds are more predisposed to barking. So expecting the dog just not to bark ever is a little bit unfair. And if you have a certain breed, let's say you have a German Shepherd, those dogs will definitely bark, especially if it comes for them protecting their territory. Again, you can do some training, you can reduce the barking, but having a dog that never barks, it's a little bit unrealistic. So understand your breed, understand your dog, and whether they were actually bred to bark in certain situations. So at least when we do the training, we can adjust our expectations. Another important thing is that although most people come to the dog trainer because they want a solution to get rid of barking, unfortunately, suppressing the barking by itself will not help your dog. And if we don't focus on fixing the underlying reason and just focus on suppressing the barking, we're going to get bigger problem in future. Let me give you an example. Let's say your dog is barking at strangers or guests in the house. If you just try to go the basic training, basic obedience route, just to teach the dog to be, calm and not bark when the guests arrive at the house, but the real underlying reason is the dog is afraid of strangers or trying to protect the territory. If you suppress the barking, the dog will use the next available tool to exert their emotions. If the dog is fearful and let's say it's barking because it's asking people not to come close, but we suppress the barking, so your guests enter the house, they see that the dog is not barking, they're like, oh yeah, let's go say hi to the dog, and then bite, and the dog attacks somebody. So in this case, instead of suppressing barking that actually signals us that the dog doesn't want people to approach them, we actually need to teach the dog to feel calm around people, to trust people, to use certain protocols, how we can actually introduce people to our dog so they don't feel a need to bark and show some signs of aggression. Or let's say your dog is barking at other dogs when you go for a walk, so you use some crazy tools, maybe you punish your dog or correct them for barking. Suppress the barking, but we didn't get rid of the emotional part. So if the dog doesn't like other dogs for some reason, instead of addressing this part, we just eliminate a way for the dog to express their feelings. So the thing that's going to happen in future, the dog might attack other dogs. Again, barking is available information for us as a pet parent, so we should not suppress it. We should dig deeper and find the underlying issue and attack the underlying issue. Because if we can change the emotional state, so if the dog is not afraid of strangers, doesn't feel any bad feelings towards other dog, they will have no need to barking. So the barking will go away by itself. Or if the dog is barking because they're afraid of something, if we get rid of this fear, if we help the dog to be more confident, they have no need to bark. Now let's look at the most common reasons for barking. I will probably not cover everything, but I will try to cover as many things that are common. One of the biggest and first probably reasons for barking, it's actually a fear-based response. It's very often happens in small dogs. People always say like, oh, the small dogs tend to bark much more. Yeah, because the small dogs can be fearful, but we usually disregard this fear because sometimes we feel like, oh, it's so cute, the dog is just barking at us, let's just rile them up even more so we can do something to provoke it. So fear-based barking is usually when the dog asks for space. For example, if there is a guest in your house and they try to approach your dog and your dog is barking at them, if people don't back off, don't leave the dog be, the barking will just intensify with time and eventually might even lead to aggression and biting. Some dogs actually develop barking as a way to ask other people not to touch them, not to pet them, For example, if you walk your dog, and people often like try to pet the dog, but the dog is in general very like fearful and timid, eventually they might start barking at people as a way to ask them to not pet them. If the dog is afraid or unsure about other dogs, and you keep like bringing your dog to the place where there are many dogs, eventually they might start barking at other dogs, again asking for the space. Stress and anxiety can also often lead to barking. One of the most common types is separation anxiety. So if your dog is very afraid to stay at home alone, they were not trained, not taught how to stay alone, they might start barking every time you're gone. You might not even know about it, but then one day your neighbors might tell you, hey, your dog is barking the whole time you're gone. Again, in this case, just tackling the barking itself is pointless. You need to teach the dog to feel safe, to feel confident, and don't panic when separated from you or when left alone at home. Barking can be also often a sign of resource guarding. I will probably do a separate video on resource guarding at some point, but resource guarding means that there is something that's very valuable for the dog, and the dog doesn't feel safe. It's afraid that other people or other dogs going to take this valuable thing from them, and they use barking as warning, like, hey, don't come close, don't touch it. Resource guarding often happens with food. It happens with treats, especially something super yummy the dog doesn't get very often. It can also happen with toys. Sometimes dogs resource guard the place where they sleep. It can be their bed, or if they sleep on a couch, it can be a couch. Sometimes they can resource guard their owner. So in this case, it's extremely dangerous to punish the dog for barking, because the next thing is going to be, if they don't bark, they're just going to attack. Instead, we need to create a training plan where we, first of all, stop taking things away from the dog. And second, we actually teach the dog to trust us that we're not going to take things away from them, or at least if we need to take something away, we're going to actually offer something better in return. Sometimes barking can be a sign of unregulated nervous system. The dogs who are usually like very hyper, very excitable, easily overstimulated, dogs who get lots of frustration, they might not get enough sleep, enough rest. The nervous system doesn't get rested, and the dog might get more irritated, and that's why they get more barking. Some dogs get overstimulated and they start barking. For example, the dog is playing way too long with other dogs, and at some point they start just barking non-stop, because that means that the nervous system is like overheated, but the dog doesn't know how to stop and how to self-regulate. And pet parent also doesn't, for example, understand that this is the good time to stop the play and let the dog have a short break and then maybe go play again. Other very common reason for barking can be frustration and excitement. For example, when they try to take the dog for a walk, as soon as you open the door and get out of the house, the dog starts pulling, running, and barking nonstop. This is usually a sign of frustration. They want to go say hi, they want to go play with every dog, but of course we are walking them on a leash. They not always can go say hi, so they start barking a lot. They're unable to wait for things. They don't have a good impulse control. And again, there is no point to punish the dog or to tell the dog you have to walk by my side, because you need to address the emotional state. You need to address why the dog is frustrated, what's going on, and how we can teach them to, calm down, breathe out, and relax. Some dogs can get frustrated around food, or they can get frustrated around toys. And if we force the dog to wait for something without teaching them how to wait politely, they might just get frustrated and they might start barking a lot. Especially in the very beginning, the frustration bark can be like just something cute when the dog is just demanding something. But sometimes if the dog really doesn't know how to deal with frustration, they can almost have like tantrums, and it's going to get worse with time when they're absolutely unable to wait for things. One of the things that people don't usually even consider, but there are many situations when the barking is directly related to undiagnosed pain and health issues. For example, if the dog has any orthopedic pain, sometimes you would notice the dog on a walk, or when they're outside, or when they're playing, they're just running around and barking or vocalizing. Or for example, if the dog doesn't let us touch them, pet them, doesn't let us handle them. Let's say if you need to pick up the dog and they become aggressive, they bark, it can also be a sign of some health issues, because basically the dog is barking because they are in pain and they don't want to be touched, because it just, aggravates the pain. So this way they're just asking for us, please don't touch me, I'm in pain. And another thing, if we're dealing with the senior dog, sometimes barking can be sign of doggy dementia. So they're getting senile, and you need to diagnose with the vet and see if you can do something to help them. But in this case, unfortunately, it's just symptom of a bigger issue. So how do we usually figure out why the dog is barking? A good competent dog trainer would ask you many, many questions and look at many different things. For example, where exactly is this barking happens? Is it in the house or is it outside of the house? Is it in the backyard? Is it on a walk? So where is the dog in the moment of barking? Then we have to look at the detailed situation. So what exactly happened right before the dog started barking? Is it something that triggered the barking? We also have to look at the dog's emotional state. Often we judge the emotional state by context and also by the dog's body language. So we're going to look at the dog and see what the body language is telling us. Is this dog is anxious, nervous, stressed? Maybe the dog is tense. Maybe they're afraid of something. Also, we're going to look at barking in terms of intensity. How long does it last? Is it just your dog does like bark, 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 and they stop? Or they start barking and nothing can stop. Also, we're going to look at the age of the dog. If we're dealing with the puppy, did it start around like 4 or 5 months? Then we can say like, oh, it's a fearful period, so the dog is just getting a little bit less confident. In this case, we need to focus more on the confidence and not on the barking itself. If it's a grown-up dog that never barked too much, but then started barking more and more and more, we'll probably suspect some pain-related issues, or if it's a senior dog, let's say 10, 12 years, we might even suspect the dog started getting some cognitive decline. We're also going to see what you already do about barking, because there are some situations, and we'll discuss it later, when we actually accidentally reinforce the barking, or maybe we try to suppress the barking before, maybe use some advice from internet or from somewhere else, and we accidentally, made the barking worse. For example, let's say my dog was barking at other dogs and somebody told me like, if the two dogs are barking at each other, just put them in one room and let them figure it out. I can promise you most probably long term the barking will get worse, and not only barking, the whole problem will get worse, because the dog was asking for a space, for a distance from the other dog, but instead we put them together hoping it will help. Obviously we didn't have malicious intent, we tried to help the dog, but we accidentally made it worse. Okay, what should you do or not do when your dog is barking? Solutions for the barking we'll probably discuss in the further videos, because each problem will probably require a separate video, but let me quickly tell you what not to do, not to make the situation even worse. The first one, please don't correct or punish your dog for barking. As I said, if the barking has an underlying issue, suppressing the bark will not resolve anything, and usually it will backfire. Also, please don't use any corrective tools, things like bark collars and shock collars, whatnot, because these tools will not fix the issue. So if you care about your dog, please don't use them. Those tools do more harm than good, especially in the situations of barking. Another thing, don't yell at your dog when they bark, because most of the time it will either not really resolve the issue, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this video. It will either make it worse, because let's say if the dog is stressed, tense, and fearful, and you start yelling at them, they're just going to be more stressed. Another thing, don't do things that you already tried to do, but they didn't work. If you try to yell at your dog, quiet, stop it, knock it off, and your dog still continues to bark, just at this point, it's pointless to do it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If you used to, I don't know, like tug on the leash, let's say you're walking your dog and they start barking and you're just tugging the leash, trust me, you're just making it worse. You're just making your dog more leash reactive. At this point, if your dog is barking at something and you can clearly see what exactly are they barking at, just get out of the situation. Just walk away, take your dog out, get them out of it. Even before you attempt any training, I can tell that in most situations, the prevention can reduce the amount of barking. If your dog is barking from the window, don't let them access that window. You can put something like a baby gate so they can't go to this particular window. You can use a privacy film to block their view, so there will be less barking. Also, another thing that many people rely on obedience training for barking. They think like, oh, if I teach my dog walk by my side, then they're going to stop barking at other dogs. Or if I teach the dog quiet, they're going to stop barking. Unfortunately, it will not work in most cases, because if barking has emotional reasons, your dog will still bark. Imagine if you get scared or startled or angry. If I keep just telling you, please be calm, you're not going to be calm, because your emotions are, exploding. The same with the dog. If they have certain emotional state, if you don't address the emotional state, obedience will not work. It can work in some situations. For example, like let's say your dog is barking at the door and they run to the door, start barking, and let's say your dog has good recall and they have the place command, and you can tell them, hey, come here, go to your bed. Yeah, this might work for this particular situation because at least you can interrupt the barking. Long term, you probably will be more successful to desensitize your dog to, I don't know, door knocking or somebody arriving in the house than relying only on obedience. So instead of, trying to patch up the problem with Band-Aid, we're actually getting rid of the problem, your dog being too reactive to, I don't know, people arriving in the house. And last but not least, there is another tip when people say like, oh, if your dog is barking, just ignore them. This is a little bit a controversial tip. I would say it works in some situations and it doesn't work in others. Let's say my dog hears like the delivery man arriving at the porch to drop off the parcel. If my dog runs to the door, or maybe they just hear it and they alert to the sound and they like woof, 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 just trying to announce somebody's at the door, I can ignore them for like, I don't know, 5-10 seconds and just see what happens. So ignoring works as a part of the experiment. Okay, I will just ignore my dog and see what's going to happen. If they stop on their own, perfect. I don't even need to interfere. But if the barking is lasting 10, 15 minutes, half an hour, ignoring is pointless. Also, sometimes people use this ignoring. Let's say if I leave my dog in a crate or if I leave my dog in a house alone, I'm just going to wait until they stop barking. I'll just ignore it until they, don't bark anymore. Unfortunately, this can be very harmful advice as well, because if your dog is panicking, and if you ignore them, you're not going to help them deal with this panic. You're not going to teach them how to be comfortable staying alone. You're just gonna, have your dog miserable, and eventually it might end up with your dog, I don't know, destroying the house or doing other things. And what to do instead? Instead, you need to figure out the reasons why your dog is barking and address those underlying reasons. So your dog has no need to bark in the first place because they trust the situation, they trust people who arrive at your house, they know how to deal with their frustration, they comfortable around other dogs, they have no pain and stuff like this. If you have a certain situation and you want to know like, oh, what could be the reason for my dog barking, you can leave a very detailed comment for me, and the more is detailed your comment, the more information I will get, and I will try to make my assumption. Of course, I'm not going to be able to diagnose your dog or offer you like a solution, because without seeing the dog might be not possible, but at least I might give you some ideas where to look into.